Hello and welcome to another A-Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a walk through the front line as per normal, and a little bit of preamble about what's happened overnight and a few facts and figures or claims around the information I'll be giving you on the front lines. So what has happened overnight? It's been a relatively quiet night overnight. The usual sort of thing going on. Air defences appear to be working fairly well, but certainly not as widespread damage or even number of missiles or drones being fired across the map. Belgorod, there have been attacks on Belgorod. Don't know what's been hit, but here's evidence of an explosion last night. So, you know, things are happening in Belgorod. Air defense is working in the Dnipro area. This is from a Ukrainian witness being pretty excited about something in the air being shot down.
Ой-ой-ой-ой-ой, ебать! Ой-ой-ой, блядь!
Ебанут!
Ух ты, нихуя!
Иди сюда! Тут охуенно будет! Давай едем туда, блядь, давай зайдем.
Тихо!
So pretty excited about that. That's appears to have been a drone taken down. Pretty large explosions. Not 100% sure, but anyway, usual things happening. Facts and figures are looking bad for Russia again, if you can trust what the Ukrainians say. But we have much better reason to trust the Ukrainians over the Russians in these sorts of claims. The Ukrainians say 730 men losses, 20 tanks, 27 APCs, and 22 artillery systems. It's actually so the men are bad enough, but this is a pretty huge figure. And that's a real uptick. Be interesting to see how that is, what that's a result of. There have been some pretty big hits. Zaporizhzhia has apparently been hit quite big, the occupied area of Zaporizhzhia, that is. And we'll have a look at that in a little while. What does the UK intelligence update say? Well, let's have a closer look. Russian soldiers serving in Ukraine are likely frustrated that they are forced to serve in old infantry combat vehicles, which they describe as aluminium cans. In mid-October, in the face of Ukrainian offensives, Russian armoured vehicles losses increased to over 40 a day, roughly equivalent to a battalion's worth of equipment every single day. In recent weeks, Russia has likely resorted to acquiring at least 100 additional tanks and infantry fighting vehicles from Belarusian stocks, which I've talked about. Armoured units and artillery are central to Russia's way of war. That's the doctrine. The force in Ukraine is now struggling partially due to difficulties in sourcing both artillery ammunition and sufficient serviceable replacement armoured vehicles. So there is a real issue that's connecting this kind of number with the challenges that the Russians are having, as according to the UK defense intelligence. So that is that. Okay, let's go and look at the northeastern area of Ukraine. So just to go back to our war map, that's here from Kupiansk down to Svatove, down to Kreminna. A lot of activity going on. Not a lot of information about what has swapped hands, if anything, and this will be something that you're used to hearing. If we go back to this northern area or northeastern area, this is Kupiansk, and we come down to Svatove here. It's all about Kuzmivka, it seems, but there is lots of fighting around Orlyansky, which is just up here. So this is where I showed you yesterday. Ukrainian lost a infantry fighting vehicle or an APC, not sure which, with troops walking behind, and that was mined, and they were all lost or injured, and that was pretty devastating. But that shows that there's stuff happening around Orlyansky. Apparently, there could be claims about Persia-Travnevi, and just also to say, looking at this tweet, that Russia launched 3 missile, 24 air and 80 MLRS strikes. Ukraine responded with 21 airstrikes hitting stockpiles, gathering points, and defensive positions. Recon losses: 60 killed in action at Persia-Travnevi, 50 injured in Vaslivka. Russia is using the local population in Svatove as a human shield, as according to these sources here. Yeah, so that's pretty devastating. 60 KIA in Persia-Travnevi. That's going to hurt for the Russians. just to remind you of where Persia Travneve is, just by this, it's along this Vilshana Persia Travneve and down to Orliansky front, on the way down to Svatove here. Let's see what information I have for you on this front. So, Defmon says Svatove-Kreminna, the Russians attacked in the area of Makivka, Nevsky, and Bilorivka, and we'll come to those. I have been told we are going to have better weather in the next few days, so I'm counting on an increased activity. I've seen no evidence indicating any change in this area. So he doesn't seem, he seems to think everything is being repulsed from attacks from the Russians, but not saying much about Ukrainian attacks. Here, someone else says the Russians shelled Ukrainian defenders at Ploshchanka in Luhansk region. So this is quite important. I'm going to show you this in a second. This shows the armed forces of Ukraine have advanced to within 2 kilometers of the Svatove-Kreminna highway. There you go, and this is talking about that. Ukrainian forces have reported being shelled in the village of Ploshchanka, roughly 2 kilometers from an important intersection along the P66 highway, allowing it to attack in 3 directions: north to Svatove, east towards Starobilsk, and south towards Kreminna. And that is pretty important. So as we come down here, we recognize that there is still lots of fighting going on in these areas. There has been pushing from Stelemivka eastwards, as I said yesterday, Kolomichika towards Svatove, but we come down further south. Makivka, talk about Makivka being activity around there, the Russians coming, but this is Ploshchanka. So I talked about there being fighting in Chernova-Popivka, as an advance towards the P66, but there was talk in the previous few days of the P66 being breached in somewhere, but no one was really sure exactly where. It was either up here near Nezarini, or down here near Ploshchanka. Well, there is certainly fighting in Ploshchanka. Ukrainians claiming they have been shelled there, which means they are there. And I have adapted the map to reflect that, and they are just a stone's throw from the highway there. So that could well be where they have got, breached the highway, or at least, it is being contested at the moment. So that is some kind of development. Just a minor point about, when places get taken. So I'm going to go further up north. So you've got, certain villages, but then an awful lot of fields between these villages. And you can talk about how, and I'm going to make this up, but the Ukrainians say, take Arapivka. And what that means is they've marched their troops and probably used some roads to get into this settlement. But it doesn't mean that they have all of this land all around there. So when you then see evidence that the Russians are over here, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the attack on Arapivka. It can be just the Russians have just occupied some empty land. So sometimes there is just empty lands seeming to swap hands, but it's not really swapping hands. It's like the Ukrainians were never there, or the Russians were never there, and the Ukrainians move into that. And so then they've got a stake over that piece of land, but then they might move on to another town or village or settlement, and then the Russians move into that piece of land, and it looks like they're capturing that land, but it's not really controlled. It's just a piece of land that people move through. So we need to be careful about, who controls what, and sometimes, and that probably explains a lot of what was going on down south here, towards Terny, Yampolivka. This grey area in between is just a lot of empty land, so people can just sort of freely go in and out. Well, not freely. They're going to be under fire control to some degree from both sides, shelling from both sides. But it's quite difficult to make maps because they are always dynamic and shifting, and a lot of it revolves around sort of empty land swapping hands type thing. Anyway, Bilorivka, so this has been under a lot of pressure from the Russians. They see this as a key place. The Ukrainians have repelled Russians again, but I don't have any further information about how much of the town that Russia actually control. There was talk yesterday, I talked to you about how they seem to have moved into some kind of northeastern outskirts of that. I haven't heard anything since. Okay, let's move on down to and I'll just speak to you about what Defmon says about these further fronts. So it's not unlikely that that Russia are allocating assets to attack in the Pavlivka area, according to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have repulsed attacks by the Russians in Bakhmut and Mayorsk. Okay, so before I get to Pavlivka, let's talk about Bakhmut. Okay, go back to my map. We come down here now. Here is Bakhmut. We've talked a lot about this. Hopefully, you'll start sort of recognizing the landmarks and the area. So we've got Soledar and Bakhmutsky up to the northeast of Bakhmut. I've talked about how Ukraine have done a really good job of doing a counteroffensive and establishing more firm control over the eastern outskirts and the eastern areas of Bakhmut. The fighting seems to be happening somewhat to the south, Opitne and Ivanhrad, this small settlement just next to Opitne, Ivanhrad there. This is where the fighting is happening, but also there's been a lot of fighting in Soledar and Bakhmutsky over the months. Now, there are rumours, and these are just rumours, and there's no substantiation that I found yet to this, but this is interesting nonetheless. And that is that there's good news coming out of Soledar. So, where do we have that? Here we go. There are good news on Soledar, but I respect the OPSEC, so I won't say anything else. This guy claiming to know something, but seems like the Russians, the Wagners, etc., are struggling in Bakhmut. Hope we have more good news soon. And then Noel, someone else I use quite a bit, says the Ukrainians keep resisting, and there is even good news. We will report on that later when it's more safe to do so. But we can say that the Ukrainians are no longer on the offensive in the Bakhmut area. That's sort of cryptic for seeming to indicate that they're not contesting Soledar anymore. They've definitely got control of these areas, and they are therefore not on the offensive and possibly defending them from further Russian attacks in the future. But there's something to do with things being a lot more secure in the Bakhmut area. Hints of that. Again, those are just rumors off social media. So, take that with a massive pinch of salt. As we come further down south, not a lot of news coming out of Avdiivka, which is this area just to the northwest of Donetsk and Donetsk Airport. Just to give you an idea of where that is on our overall map, we have now come down Kupiansk, Svatove-Kreminna, around here to Bakhmut, and now Avdiivka. But I'm not going to dwell on that. Really, no news coming out there. Still sort of contested in the Vodyani area, and that continues to be the case. What I was saying yesterday is they really want to break through Vodyani so they can come and circle around and take Pervomaisky, which is being so difficult for the Russians to take, coming directly from Donetsk. So there'll be an element of being able to flank their Pervomaisky troops, but also flank up here to Avdiivka, which is why they're also concentrating up north as well. But anyway, no extra news from there. Let's come down to Vuhledar. So here we have, much of the same really. So Pavlivka is an area that is under intense fighting at the moment. The Russians are trying to push north there, but the Ukrainians have the high ground in Vuhledar, so they can pick things off. And this appears to have been what has been happening. The Ukrainians have repelled Russian advances there, but it is also all about what's going on over up here. So Novomykhailivka is under quite a bit of pressure from the Russians, because if they can advance up here, it's all about this road from Vuhledar to Konstantinivka, and there's some degree of fire control. There's another Vodyani, who knew? They can establish fire control. Well, they have established fire control over this road apparently, so it is difficult. And if the Ukrainians can't use this road, then they are relying on unpaved roads. So these smaller roads are not paved, which means that they are sort of subject to quite muddy conditions. It's very difficult to move around. So there you go. What else can we say about? Get to the right place. So this is around Pavlivka. Now, I'm not going to show you this footage, but there is one that's doing the rounds of a Russian tank that's been hit by a mine and it's disabled, and the tank driver, tank commander, whoever is tankman is on top of the tank, trying to sort of work out what to do. It's all sort of calmed down. The miner's been and gone. It doesn't necessarily mean there are people around, of course. So he's just on top of the tank doing whatever, and then it gets hit by an anti-tank missile. So the Ukrainians are obviously close enough to be able to do that. And the guy flies about 50 meters. Just it's an incredible bit of footage, but obviously not greatly appropriate to show here. But what's important about this footage is it's geolocated, and what does it tell us? So here is what Tendar says. The footage of the flying Russian tankman reveals quite a lot. It must be recent footage, not older than 36 hours. The tracks are quite dark, revealing that many Russian tanks and other vehicles have passed it. It must have been a main Russian attack line, and it's been sort of located to this line here going into Pavlivka. And then he continues, we can assume that many Russian vehicles have entered Pavlivka, but also failed because the destruction of the flying Russian tank proves the Ukrainian forces can destroy Russian tanks in the orange kill box, even laying mines. So there are still mines here. So the anti-tank missile came also right in front of the kill box. Summary, Russian attack on Pavlivka is indeed happening. Attack involves many Russian vehicles, but the main thrust comes from the southeast. Ukrainian forces are successfully pushing the Russians back and starting to destroy them in the fields. So let's take that back to my map. What does this tell us? So it tells us that although the Russians are advancing on Pavlivka and have at least 50% of the town, they're still getting hit with their vehicles out here. And there's geolocated video evidence of this. So not only is this mined and the mines are still active, but then there are people close enough to be able to fire, an ATGM. So these sort of either man pads or shoulder held, shoulder launched rockets, or things like the skiff, the Stugna, which are two-men jobs with a tripod that fires it out, and someone operating the guidance. But of course, there are so many different ways of firing these things. But let's look at, so that's 2 kilometers. So the Ukrainians can still hold these areas here, and easily with a skiff. I mean, skiffs can work up to 5 kilometers away. So you could even see a skiff get used, or a Stugna get used from Vuhledar all the way down to the fields there. So let's go. Oh, this is miles. Let's go to. I want to use kilometers actually. Sorry for you Americans and old school British people, but so 5 kilometers. So a Stugna has got that kind of range. I've seen them hit over that, but that's safe. So from the higher ground, actually, any vehicle approaching Pavlivka from the south can I don't know about line of sight exactly, but I'm assuming it could probably get hit by an ATGM of sorts from all the way from Vuhledar, or of course just from Pavlivka itself. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting a point to make there. Let's now zoom out and look at Zaporizhzhia as a whole. So we heard of places being hit. So before we leave this area around Vuhledar, there was it wasn't Novotroitsky. Where is it? One of these settlements around here. I don't know exactly which one it was hit badly yesterday in a missile attack, and you're starting to see other places around here, not starting, but we're hearing. I don't know. It seems more about it. Let's give you some footage of apparently a pretty big attack. So footage has been released of a big Ukrainian strike on Russian positions in occupied Zaporizhzhia. This has been one of the big hits, causing a spike in high death numbers the last couple of days. Locals say over 100 were taken by the occupiers to hospitals. And this doesn't really show an awful lot other than, explosions and dust. I don't even know particularly where it is. So it has a limited utility for me here, but this is indicative of. Sorry, I've caught the footage here. It's indicative of effort being put into taking out places in the Zaporizhzhia area. Now, the Zaporizhzhia Oblast is a big old oblast. Okay, so this is Zaporizhzhia. So it could be anywhere around here. I mean, where we were just talking about Pavlivka, that isn't even in Zaporizhzhia, that's still Donetsk. So but there are big hits taking place, and we've seen consistent upticks in numbers over the last sort of 4 days or so, going from sort of 900 and something down to 600 something, but 600 something is still really high. 500 something, back up to 730 today. And that just goes to show that things are happening around here. Okay, as before I move on to Kherson, there's quite a bit to say about Kherson. Melitopol. So there have been hits in Melitopol. In Melitopol this morning, the explosions were heard. So let's just near the airfield and close to the mobilised occupiers' base. Now, this is also an area of some amount of partisan activity. There's been quite a bit of partisan activity in Melitopol over the last few months, sort of bombs and whatnot. We've also got Melitopol media and city mayor report night strikes at about 5:50 this morning along Dmitry Dontsov Street. 3 powerful explosions. The top 3 floors of the premises where the office of the leadership of Russian FSB, so the secret service of the Russian forces, was located and destroyed. So Melitopol is being targeted. It seems now. Is this a sign of things to come? There's lots of talk still about fixing Russian forces in Kherson and then hitting down from Zaporizhzhia to Melitopol. There are Russian claims that the Ukrainians are still reinforcing air troops in Zaporizhzhia. Okay, so these are still like literally going on every day. There are claims that Ukrainians are doing that. Is that true? And if it's true, what does it mean? Is it defensive? Are the Ukrainians anticipating a Russian offensive, or are the Russians anticipating a Ukrainian offensive down to probably Melitopol? And this could, I mean, personally, I think that's a pretty brilliant plan if they've got the wherewithal to do that. Not the wherewithal, if they've got literally the resources to be able to do that. Striking down there, fixing the Russians in here, and it would just cause utter panic, and then people would be really worried about Crimea. So there you go. Anyway, as we move on to Kherson, not a lot of news about any kind of exchange of territory here, pretty much similar to yesterday, but quite a lot of other news coming out of Kherson that really needs to be mentioned. Okay, so where do we start? No. What Defmon says, Kherson, I've been looking at some fresh satellite images from the area west of the city of Kherson, so Kherson and west of the city. It seems like every tree line hold entrenched positions. It seems like the Russians are still building fortifications in this area. What this means is that there is a lot of talk about fortification going on all over this area and also on the west bank of this river. So I'll just show you some evidence of fortifications going on here. So there is, are the Russians planning on holding here? Or are they planning on getting out and holding the other side of the river? Because the Novokhovka Dam, or the pumping station that gets fresh water from here down to Crimea, is super important. Or are they doing both? We're going to try and build fortifications, hold out for as long as possible, but in the event that we do lose this area, we'll be able to keep the West Bank. And personally, that seems fairly reasonable to me. Let's look at some other claims. Last week, I received unconfirmed reports of Russian brigades being informed about preparations for a retreat to the left bank of the Dnieper. That's the western bank. Eastern bank. Beginning no later than the 6th of November. For me, these reports were too vague at the time, which I couldn't confirm, and it was a single source of truth. So we didn't report them then. However, he's having second thoughts now, but something has changed. In line with those early reports, the last couple of days, pro-Russian accounts have started sharing messages that worrying or bad news is coming in the next days, which could hint towards the start of a gradual military retreat from the right bank. Now, this doesn't confirm anything yet, but it adds up to all the preparations that have been made by the Russians the last couple of weeks. Inhabitants forcibly evacuated, administration relocated, medical pharmaceutical supplies taken out, buses seized, transport stopped. Strengthened defence on the left side of the Dnieper. Evacuation zone expanded 15 kilometres in response to possible dam collapse. Reports throughout Kherson of abandoned checkpoints, museum and art and monuments seized. Withdrawal of all military equipment from Chernobivka Airport. For comparison, before the Russian troops were forced out to leave Kiev and Kharkiv region, we saw the same patterns. Just before the actual withdrawal, messages from worried Russians started appearing in pro-Russian channels, not much later followed by the actual withdrawal. Yes, there are arguments why Russia is not going to evacuate. For example, they are still flooding the right bank with mobilized soldiers, but whether this is actually to maintain a foothold in Kherson is questionable. Also, some of their best units are there, i.e. the 76th Airborne. The coming days or week will clarify whether the Russians have actually prepared a withdrawal from Kherson or a different strategy is on the way. Exciting days or weeks are ahead, which will change the course of the battle in the way, I am sure. So that's a really good summary of the arguments for and against a military withdrawal from Kherson. In other words, for Noel, it's like 50-50. Don't really know, but actually, those reports I was hearing are starting to make a bit more sense now, and it could be that there are entrenchments being made here, but they are possibly going to be filled with mobilized troops, as there is a general military withdrawal to the left bank here, this eastern bank of the Dnipro. And 15 kilometers expanded zone of general evacuation under the claim that, the safety for the dam, but it could be to prepare a battle zone just as much. Okay, so just to continue, because there's lots going on in Kherson, more evidence that Russians are fortifying the eastern southern bank of the Dnipro in Holopristan. A batch of concrete pillboxes arrived. I talked about these pillboxes being down on, we know that they are down for some reason on this area, on this peninsula, on this isthmus of land, but also along the east bank of the Dnipro in Holopristan. So that's over here. So again, with a view across towards Kherson, but towards this isthmus. But that's not the only reason that Holopristan was in the news. We'll come to that. So Russia has started to destroy antennas in the Kherson Oblast on the western side of the Dnipro River. Ivanivka, Tokarivka, and Berislav are the possible location of those pictures. That implies that Putin has issued a Nero decree, making all valuable items useless before retreating. So this lends itself to what Noel was just saying, in that they could well be retreating, and it's a scorched earth policy. Local Kherson media claim that mobile communication towers in many settlements were blown up by the Russians. Photos shows a supposedly blown up tower in Ivanivka, as well as a map and location of other places where towers are claimed to have been blown up. And not only that, in Kherson, the paranoia and worry of the Russians is increasingly evident. Unbelievably, the occupants have been going around harbours and shooting all private boats to make sure they're not able to be used. This is, a pretty interesting choice of the Russians, but again shows evidence that they are, I don't know, possibly doing a scorched earth approach. On the other hand, Antonovsky Bridge yesterday was hit by the Ukrainians. Although there are some saying like 6 HIMARS hit the bridge, it might have also been a hit, as you can see and hear from this video, on the alternative pontoon bridge that's been built just sort of underneath it. As you can see, these hits aren't on the bridge, but that's not the sound of just hitting water, so it sounds like they are hitting maybe the pontoon bridge, and this will really affect how the Russians can resupply their troops across there. Also, more explosions in Kherson. 6 missiles are thought to have hit around Novokakhovka and Kakhovka near the hydroelectric plant. Here you can see separate fires and explosions seemingly near the plant. So the Ukrainians are definitely hitting back in Holopristan. So where I talked about those pillboxes just now, Kherson region explosions were heard too last night. On the video, it's visible that local administration building has become the target. So again, evident that the Ukrainians are hitting key strategic or tactical places. And this is interesting. Look what turned up in occupied Kherson, phantom made in Iran. So not only weapons which are repressive, which the repressive Middle East state is helping Russia with, um, also you're seeing this. So this is evidence that someone has come over from Iran, troops to support or experts to support the use of the Iranian drones. There you go. So that's what I have to say today. A little bit more sort of information on some of the stuff going on in the Kherson area, just to give you guys pause for thought about exactly what the Russians are planning. Are they planning on withdrawing, but maybe a decent tactical operational withdrawal that allows them to bleed Ukraine as much as possible so that they get across maybe either into Kherson and defend Kherson or across the river and defend from across the river? Or kind of both, defend from across the river and also maybe just Kherson city, and cause huge losses for the Ukrainians because that kind of urban battle will cost Ukraine dearly. It's going to be interesting to see. I think hitting Ukraine from across the river is probably a pretty good tactic, especially since the Ukrainians once if the Ukrainians if or when and if and when so when Ukraine take this whole area, they will obviously have to get across the river in order to do anything else, and that's going to be really difficult if the Russians hold this whole region, and all of the bridges have already been blown up by the Ukrainians themselves. What happens then? I guess for the Ukrainians, just taking Kherson and having some degree of control over this water that is provided from Novokhovka down to Crimea is going to be super important for them. Anyway, there you go. Sorry for me banging on too long as ever, but please like, subscribe, share. Help out the channel if you can. Thanks so much for your time and support. And if you want to help, if you want to help my channel a little bit, you can go to uasupporter.com/ATP, grab some stash, and that will give a little bit of commission to my channel. And you can show your support for Ukraine by grabbing some of these bestseller patches and sewing them onto your rucksack. So when you hang out around cool bars, people know, it's your way of virtue signaling. Everyone loves to do it. Ignore me, I'm rambling. Take care. Speak to you later.